This is the Trading Psychology Podcast. This is VP, creator of No Nonsense Forex and author of the book No Nonsense Forex Trading Psychology. And with me, as he is every week, it is the well-traveled Robb Reinhold.
Hey everybody, nice to be here. And speaking of well-traveled, I'm about to be even more well-traveled after this episode.
Yeah, if you guys don't know, we're shooting a bunch together because Robb is going on vacation, and part of that vacation involves being off the grid. So we won't be able to contact him or shoot podcast episodes. So we're doing a lot of these in advance, but that's okay. None of these are really time sensitive, especially this one. This was actually a suggestion from a user. We ask for those from time to time, and at any point in time, traders, if you want to get into the comment section on YouTube and suggest an episode that we haven't done yet, feel free to do so. We're always welcoming ideas from you because I like the ideas that we come up with, but it's even more special and more organic if it comes from the actual audience. So this one is on perfectionism, which I thought, Robb, was a really, really great suggestion, because I have suffered from this myself. You told me off camera, you think you know why, so we'll get to that as well. But is this something, is ever something that has bothered you at any point in time, or does your own personality type just not really fall into this?
My personality type does not fall into this. And, growing up as a kid, I was never really concerned about perfection. I just wasn't concerned about it. I was more concerned about getting stuff done than ever was about perfection. Obviously, other kids did better than me in certain things, and I didn't seem to have much of an issue with it at that age.
I certainly did, and maybe it stems from what you and I had talked about in the past, how I was kind of ordained the smart kid in school, and so everything I did from intellectual and academic standpoint, I always felt needed to be like just the absolute best because I wasn't good at anything else. This is the one thing that really defined me. It was my identity. So I always just really, really tried to make everything perfect. And no, it did not serve me very well. And then, later in life, it really started to get in my way.
Well, Patrick, I want to jump in and just point out that, yes, perfectionism can be driven by your internal monologue, meaning who you are. There are some people that are born that are just meant to really strive. However, this is something I see from external sources, probably even more than internal sources. Imagine that you grew up in a family where perfectionism was demanded. It was expected, it was demanded. And all of a sudden, you are now in a situation where you are forced to be perfect at a young age, and you're forced to be this way. Then it's very tough to go out in life and kind of unwind that stuff as you're, in the teenage years. And so you're going to keep repeating that as well. So I see this either at someone who has a very, very demanding childhood with demanding parents that say you must be perfect, you must get an A, you must be at the top of the class. And I also see it on the exact opposite. Maybe a kid who grows up in a family that's not so great, and they've got a chip on their shoulder and they got something to prove. They're going to prove they're not like their environment. They're not like their parents. They're not like their family. And that fire drives them through their whole life. So I think this is really, it could be internal, but I think externally it's probably more common.
All right, well, we'll dive into that a little bit here. Before we do, let me go ahead and define kind of the two sections I want to get into here when it comes to actual trading. We can talk about other things and how it might tie into trading, but as far as trading goes, the two areas that I see this come into play the most is when you're first building a system and putting it together, and the second part is when you're actually trading the system. So let's get into the first one first. When you're building a system, and again, I've been affected by this a lot. I had to get over it because I just wasn't moving forward, and I noticed that, and I always felt like I was up against the clock a little bit in terms of, I really got to get good at this fast. I can't just sit there and needle pick everything. But it still affected me. And what I would often say to myself when I was putting this together, keep in mind I was using indicators and I was discovering this whole world of untapped treasure that really there wasn't any reference on. So I would find something good that would work. But in my mind, I'm like, Robb, why should I even get started with this when I know that there's probably better tools out there? I mean, I'm going to be committing, a year or so just to testing this out with fake money and real money, back testing, forward testing, all that, it makes perfect sense to me, at the time at least, to just go ahead and keep searching for better and better indicators and make this thing as perfect as I possibly can. What are there any flaws you see with that logic?
I wouldn't say flaws. Well, okay, yes, I'll say flaws. Once a month, I meet with my recruiters and we talk about potential people we are going to bring on board. And we talk about some of the, I'll just say funny interviews that they have. And there's been several times over the last 15 years where they will have someone who's been working on their system for 17 years, has never made a real trade, but they've been working on their system for 17 years. And that's just mind-blowing. I can't even fathom that. So look, there's nothing wrong with back testing. There's nothing wrong with, making sure everything's right and crossing the T's and dotting the I's. But at some point, you got to get it over the finish line. So if you're not over the finish line, it's time to get it over the finish line.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into my second point here, but I want to close on the first one because I do find a really big flaw in the logic that I presented earlier. And it is this: if you keep trying to search for something better and better all the time before even starting, you're never going to start. Like you said, that might be what this guy was doing. That might have been his inner monologue, because you're just going to keep chasing that rabbit further and further, and there is no end game. Where's the end game? If you always think there's something better out there, it's only going to lead you to, I guess, analysis paralysis and never start, which is horrifying. I would hate to see wasted talent because of this one reason. So if this is happening to you, mark my words, we're going to go over solutions at the bottom of the show. But if this is something that you have even said to yourself one time, make sure you keep listening to the rest of this episode. But the other reason is something I think you touched on too, Rob. I think there's an inner monologue with people as well, to where the real reason why they're doing this is because they're too in love with the process and they're actually afraid to start trading. Because testing everything takes no money. It just takes time. Trading actually has the threat of losing money, and that's just crippling to them. Do you think that's a possibility? Because I always figured that really could be a reason why people never get off the ground.
I don't think it's just the possibility. I think that is the exact reason. That right there, the exact reason. They're scared to fail. And look, and I get it. Scared to fail. And especially, I actually think the longer you spend putting together a system, the more invested you are in this thing never being tested so it doesn't possibly fail. I actually think if you put 10 years of your life into a system and then you finally decided you're going to test it out, and then find out it failed and you look back at all of your work as meaningless. No, look, you shouldn't look at it as meaningless. You learned a lot of stuff, but there's that binary thinking that, hey, it's either got to work or it doesn't. I think the main reason, pretty much the only reason people wouldn't start, was fear.
Yeah, and then on to the next part, because I think fear carries over here. When you're actually trading your system, let's say you're trading it for a firm, trading it with real money, or you're trading it on demo and trying to present it to somebody to get hired or to sell signals, whatever you're doing, when it actually means something. And you end up taking a series of losses, or you have a couple bad months strung together. And now doubt is creeping in. Maybe this to you is the right time to go back to the drawing board and tweak things. I don't think it is, Rob. Can you make the case either way?
Oh, I can definitely make the case either way. Unless there's some real flaw that you just blew it. Like if you just blew something, I didn't think of that. But if you take it offline, that is the biggest mistake you could do. Now, look, you could do stuff like leave it online, but at a 1/10 of a position size. I get that. Okay. But you can't just take it offline. I mean, that's how systems work. You have to have all the data so you can actually, if in the end you want to make some changes, you have this really robust data. If you go for 2 months and then something happens and you take it offline, you are just killing yourself. That is a bad idea.
Yeah, and Rob made a really good point there. and I want to express this to everybody else too in different words. Even when you are trading real time for real money, you are still collecting data. The data collection part of your career right now, especially early on when you're doing this, is probably more important than anything you did before or after. So you need to keep going. I say this all the time too. When you back tested your system, it had a lot of losses strung together at some point. It put together bad months at some point. You just didn't see it happen. And the computer doesn't care. So the reason it was able to do so well is it withstood those, and instead of saying, okay, I'm going to take a break or go back to the drawing board or tweak the system, it just kept going. And when it did that, it ended up giving you the results that you sit there and are trying to achieve from this point forward. It was obviously good enough for you then. So yeah, exactly. We've talked about this before on the show. There's no real reason to take a break unless there's external things happening in your life. If you're just flat out losing, you just have to keep going forward. I don't think that's the right way. Now, the other thing that I put, this is kind of a side note, really, when you're trading a system is, I have something called the Indicator Profile series on my show where we're showing some really great indicators. We test them out. Some of them give you really great results. You might be tempted to introduce one of those into your system on the fly because it did really well, right? Probably not the move either. Again, I don't want to get too far ahead in the solutions here, Rob, but do you have anything to add to this?
A/B testing is the only way to know if it's good or not. So keep testing your system and then build an identical system next to it, run it right next to it, and you can just run it in demo if you want, and then collect the data after 2-3 months, whatever you want. Look at the data, and then maybe you could enter it. A/B testing is what every trader should be doing. Anytime you say, I wonder if A/B tested.
Rob likes to jump ahead of the solutions early, but that's fine.
I didn't even read that. Sorry.
Yeah, we have some other takes on that too, but part of what you said is part of the solution, so I will save it for then. But before I want to rehash the problems and then go ahead and get into the solutions. But before I do that, Rob, you were telling me something very interesting. Back in episode, I think it was 2 of the Trading Psychology podcast, we all took personality tests. And you're saying there are certain personalities that are very, very susceptible to falling into this perfectionism trap, and there's certain ones that aren't. Do you care to kind of go over that real quick before we move forward?
Yes, I would love to go over it, because when we look at the reasons why you do what you do and why I do what I do, we think it's because of the things that we're thinking, or like our willpower or our ability to learn from mistakes. No, it's none of that. It is so much more core to us than that, and that's our personality. Now, in your Myers-Briggs personality style test, you've got the first letter is for extrovert or introvert. This doesn't really apply to that. This could be universal to those two. If you are an N, so like I am an ENTP. N means intuitive, meaning I don't need to know all the nuts and bolts of how it works. I just need to know how it works. An N is very unlikely to be a perfectionist. Very unlikely. If you are an S, a sensor, meaning you need to know how the wheels turn on the car before you can really get in the car because you got to know how it works, that is going to be a precursor to you obsessing over things, saying, I got to know it all before I can move on. The next letter is you're either a thinker or a feeler. If you're a feeler, don't worry, this isn't going to affect you. If you're a thinker, then yeah, your brain works very linear. And so, everything is in a line, and if things are out of line, you have a hard time moving forward on those. And then the last one, you either have a P, perceptive, which is, hey, I see shades of gray, that's me. Or you get the J's that are very rigid in their thinking. And for a J, it either works or it doesn't. It's good or it's bad. It's good or it's evil. And so it's very difficult if you are either an ESTJ or an ISTJ, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You will definitely fall into this, again, paralysis by analysis, need for perfectionism, need for all the answers. So if you know that, if you've taken the personality test and you know that, and let's say you're young. Now, if you're old, you already know this, but let's say you're 19 and you're like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden you realize that's why I do what I do. And in that episode, we said, don't try to change it. Embrace it. It's who you are. You have so many strengths with that combination of personality. But there's negatives behind every personality trait. Learn those negatives. Learn what they are. Be on the lookout for them. Put in guardrails so when you start to go too far one way, those guardrails put you back in place. It's going to be really, really powerful for you to know that as a younger person. Look, those of you that are like me and they're almost 50s or 60s or 70s, we've already come to terms with it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important episodes we have done. So if you don't remember that one, or if you never took the test, go back to episode 2. If your podcast player doesn't go that far, just know we put all these on YouTube, and it's certainly on YouTube, and you can just click on the playlist and scroll back. And the link for the test is in the show notes of that episode, and you can find out where you fall too. But regardless of what type of personality you are and whether you are susceptible to this, even if you are, it doesn't make it okay. The biggest problems are, kind of the obvious. Perfect is always the enemy of great. Rob and I were talking a bit about off camera. Unless you're like a high-level professional athlete or a musical virtuoso, there's just no real need for anything like that, and you're probably going to end up doing more harm than good. And then the worst thing, like what Rob talked about with that guy who's been testing for 17 years, is you may never end up actually trading if you always think there's something better out there. You're right, there could be something better out there, but you can crack that 0.1% simply by just being great and not being perfect. We've said before, it's all how you follow your system more than the actual system itself. It's much, much more the latter than it is the former. So just remember that going forward. Rob, do you have anything to add to that before we get to the solutions? Any other problems you can see with somebody like this in terms of how they're going to end up waylaying their own career, or anything that I haven't mentioned yet?
I just want to bring up something we talked about in earlier episodes called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And it's basically you put in too little effort, it doesn't matter as much, or it doesn't matter enough for you to be in the optimal state. If you put in too much time and effort and worry about it too much, all of a sudden you have stress and all the negatives and you end up underperforming. There's a book called, I want to say it's called Get in the Flow, or I don't know what it is. It's a great book. Sorry, I don't have a better answer here for it, but look it up. It's about basically getting in the flow of life and like finding your flow and finding your spot. That's the best place you can be in because it's kind of effortless. You're in the current, you're in the flow. So just let it take you. Find that homeostasis where you're working hard enough to, you have to put in the work to be successful at this, but you're not doing damage. And I think you said that earlier, Patrick, is sometimes you go too far and you actually do damage.
Yeah, I'm always trying to improve my system, but I'm not dedicating a ton of time to it. And when I trade, I legit don't care about the results. I just enter the trades and I come back the next day and I see what I have to do. And I just treat it like a job, like a very bland data entry type job. And my trading's never been better. But as far as the solutions to perfectionism, actually go, I'm going to give mine, Rob, and then I want you to add yours if you have one, or two or more. But the first one is to just dance with the girl that brought you. All right. You put together a system. It performs really well in backtesting. Now, what you really have to see at this point is how well can you follow it? And if you can follow a system that performs well, really well, you're probably going to do really great. And if you're journaling, and if you're doing it the right way, you'll actually know this answer. If you're not, then you're probably not going to know this answer. You're going to have to guess, which is terrible. But dance with the girl that brought you and see how far it goes. Then, if you find better ways to do things, then on a separate demo account, that can be your little laboratory while you do things in the background.
So sort of like a side chick, Patrick? Like you got your main girl and then you get a side chick?
Yeah, and the great thing is they'll never know about each other. So you get the best of both worlds. So you get to find out two things. One, can this system actually be better? And two, how well can I follow the system? And you don't have to do this in alternate years. You can do it at the same time. This is the best time saver I can even think of. Rob, do you have any other solutions that I haven't come up with yet?
I do. And we're talking about, someone who's built a system and they're just worried that it's just not there yet. It's not perfect. They haven't tested it in every situation. They haven't done this and this. That's a really common way for Jays to think. It's kind of like all or nothing. Like, oh my gosh, this pool, it looks so deep. The water looks so cold. Like, I don't know if I want to jump in it. Do I not want to jump in it? Put a toe in. Put a toe in. It's going to be okay. Put a toe in. So if you're like hesitating and holding back, then in your mind, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I put this money in. I put it on the line. I lose it all. What's going to happen to me? That's all or nothing. And that causes paralysis because then you think about all the negative things that might happen. And so then you actually don't end up taking action. Scale. It's all scale. If you made a trade and your risk was, $1, okay. Now look, you're not going to make any money, but you can at least get in the water. You can put that toe in. So if you are feeling that fear that, should I get in? Should I get out? You don't have to jump in the deep end of the pool. Dip a toe in, run your system, then put your foot in, keep running it, and then put your whole leg in, and eventually you'll be in the water.
So I'm going to kind of end with this question to you, Rob. And it's an interesting question because let's say I'm doing what VP just said to do. I'm running this system that I tested a while back. And I'm trading real money. And I'm also testing other things in the background. And in the background, I came up with a system that really outperforms the one I'm running. And so now in the back of my mind, I know that my results could be even better. What should I do now? Because this is going to eat at me if I don't at least try this other system. But I may end up having to scrap the one I'm using, and I've already put in so much time and effort and testing to this system. And I'm like, I'm almost there, but over here on the other side, I have this other thing that could work even better. And I know my perfectionism is eating at me again, but I mean, I'm kind of making a case here, aren't I?
Not really. And I say that as, when you look at things in a binary nature, oh my gosh, do I throw my old system away and trade this new system, or do I stay with my old system? That binary way of thinking causes paralysis. It just causes paralysis because, you're making a huge decision. So the question I always have is, hey, is there something you can do in the middle? Is there something you can do to phase this in over time where maybe you take 10% of your money out of your main account, put it in this account, and then you determine every month I'm going to take 10% out of that one, put into this one. And then at 6 months, you've got 50-50 of your money. And then you can really see which one's best. And then at some point you may say, hey, let me put the rest of my money over the new system. Binary thinking it causes lots and lots of psychological issues because when you go from black to white, it's such a difference. And there's real serious consequences when you go from absolute black to absolute white. The consequences are really big. When you go from white to beige, it's not that big of a deal. And then you can just keep working your way up, and eventually you can get over to black. And it was a very comfortable way to do it. So my advice is stop the binary thinking, figure out some way to mix them all together, and it's going to be much more comfortable.
Yeah, that was pretty much going to be my advice too. It's not like our side chick analogy to where if you're going to get married, you kind of have to pick one of them. Unless you're from Rob's neck of the woods, then you can have two. But most people aren't. So what you would have to do in this situation instead, because you don't have to pick just one. You can trade both systems. Like Rob said, kind of migrate some funds or some time or whatever over to the other one and then run them simultaneously. It is going to take a little more time, but if you really do think you have something that is going to perform even better, then you probably owe it to yourself to give it a try. You want to have some kind of closure there. So I definitely support that. So anything else, Rob, before we wrap it up here?
No, I think we covered this one really nicely here.
I think so too. And I want to thank you all for joining us here at the Trading Psychology Podcast. Rob and I will see you next episode.
Goodbye, everybody.